It has been a long time since I used this motherfucker, man. Let me see if I still know how this shit works. Real Rap Coalition Podcast. Y'all see the title of what the fuck we're doing today. It has been a long time, as I've said. I did one of these other videos about an AEW event. I believe it was Dynasty of last year. With that being said, I am the main character. Uh, y'all like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to get into this. There's a lot of things to talk about. It was a very eventful weekend for All Elite Wrestling. Um, One thing I'm going to start with is that, so I went to see this event live. It was in Texas, so that was something that was a big determining factor for me, is that it is the biggest AEW show of the year, and it was in my state. So I don't know when I'm going to have this opportunity again. I had already talked about doing it months ago, made plans and whatnot, but I never really followed through because, a bunch of life things had happened, things had changed, whatever the case may be. And I really ended up making the official plan, to put my foot down and actually go probably about a week out from the event. I took a beautiful woman with me. It was about a 5 hour drive, so it had to be a little bit dedicated for some shit like this. But we're going to get into it. One thing, before we get into anything like related to the matches themselves, I ended up getting there during probably about 20, 30 minutes into the 2 hour long 0 hour, which was an interesting choice. We had some things we had to take care of, had different situations trying to get inside the building, get to our seats and whatnot. It's a large stadium. Um, but we missed the announcement that Adam Cole would not be defending his TNT championship due to an injury that, since it has come out, that it is most likely he suffered on the collision before the show. So, 3 days or so before the show. They didn't go into detail. I later on, Adam himself came out and delivered from what I understand, is a very heartfelt speech. I didn't know, what was going to happen or what was happening. I found out that the match wasn't happening after I'd gotten to the arena. And then when it got time for the match, we had already decided that, all right, I need to go to the bathroom, I need to get a drink, whatever the case may be. I thought I had a little bit more time, so we took a step out, as he was coming out to the ring, and I was like, I'm not sure why this guy's coming out here if, like, he's not wrestling. But from my understanding, the context of the speech was basically, hey, I'm fucked up in a very serious manner, to me at least, and I'm not sure if I'm going to ever be able to wrestle again. And so that is pretty terrible, honestly, because as much it depends on how much you believe, the wrestling dirt sheets and the gossip, whatever that goes around. The media reports that it was more than likely caused due to it was just a lariat gone wrong on the collision episode from Kyle Fletcher. People were already, a month and some change ago, upset at Kyle Fletcher for, an apron powerbomb spot that looked really gnarly on a man who already has been ridden with concussions before. Um, so it really sucks. And the thing that I've made the point of is that, Adam Cole doesn't deserve this. By all accounts, for all intents and purposes, he is a, fantastic human being. He's a very good professional wrestler at his peak. And beyond that, I think that it also has potential to have negative ramifications for Kyle Fletcher, who has hugely stepped into his own. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I am worried that it could take the legs out of two very promising potential careers, and I think that sucks, honestly. But yeah, I wanted to get that out of the way. So he did not end up defending his title. He ended up forfeiting it, and it was replaced by a match that we will get into later in the night. Now, with that being said, my seats were pretty close to the ring, honestly. We were on the floor. I'd say we were maybe 8 to 10 rows back from the guardrail itself, so pretty good quality tickets, very affordable. It's one thing that like I will applaud AEW for is that their tickets, they don't scalp people. You know, you can get a good quality seat even at their biggest show, and you won't have to take out a second mortgage on your house to do so. We didn't know we were going to be that close until we got there and just kept looking and kept, getting closer. But that was a good experience in itself. Um, there wasn't any disgusting, sweaty, smelly ass wrestling fans next to us. To my knowledge, although those chairs were set really fucking close together. So, luckily I was there with somebody that I didn't mind being all, rubbing upon, or else it would have been a terrible experience. But with that being said, let's get started. We got there, 30 minutes into the 0 hour, the 2 hour 0 hour, and uh, so we were there pretty ahead of the matches actually starting. The first match was Shane Taylor Promotions. That Shane Taylor, Lee Moriarty, Captain Sean Dean, and Carly Bravo versus I had it in a blank. Dustin Rhodes, Sammy Guevara, and the Von Erich tag team of Kevin and Marshall. And so it was a good opening match to start the show. I am not a fan of Shane Taylor Promotions, and in the wrestling Discord that I am in and talk about that shit, I talk about how boring I feel that they are. I wish that I could enjoy some shit. I was a good proponent of the infantry, before they joined STP. Um, Captain Sean Dean and Carly Bravo were they're very enjoyable people to watch wrestle, in my opinion. Lee Moriarty, I feel like he's just like he has things that are supposed to make him cool, but he just never like interests me. He maybe it's his lack of momentum, that he can ever get going, or at least on the show that I watch consistently. I watched Ring of Honor for like a while whenever they first started doing Honor Club. I just finally stopped because at one point there was literally an episode where it was like multiple hours long, and there was like 16 fucking matches with nothing else in between. It wasn't like big storyline matches. It was just match after match after match, and I was like, I enjoy wrestling, but this is just I'm sitting here watching Blake Christian fight the fucking woolly mammoth Willie over here. Like this is absolutely insane. Why do we need this many? But this is a side point. Uh, it was a good match that didn't overstay its welcome. It got the crowd invested, showed them what they would be watching for the night. Uh, all of the good old Texas boys got the victory, and that was definitely the right call. In Texas, the Von Erichs have been and I explained to this lovely lady next to me about the lineage of the Von Erichs and, about their current journey of redemption of the family legacy and whatnot. And I have always been a big proponent that I want to see them on AEW TV more. I understand right now, I assume, it's benefiting them on Ring of Honor to be holding the six-man tag belts with Dustin. I don't know what the matches are. Maybe I should look up some of the matches and see what they've done with it. But I want to see them on AEW TV, hopefully by 2026. I know they're still relatively young, I believe. As wrestlers don't start hitting their peak until about 30. It's not like any other sport. But I want to see them, in a tag division that has been struggling lately in terms of not necessarily quality of teams, but quantity of believable teams. Um, I think that they could benefit. Dustin is phenomenal. The man is 50 something years old, and just goes out there and leaves it all in the ring every time. He's had, his checkered past with his drug addictions and, his difficult gimmicks that he's been saddled with and whatnot. But it's really nice to see that, like, on this, whatever is his final run, that he is getting his flowers. He currently he walked into this pay per view with two title belts that he has held for a good period of time. The other being the tag team titles with Sammy Guevara, which gives Sammy something to do. So good for him. But they were able to get a good victory, a feel good moment. I personally jumped out of my seat. I just kept hoping that Kevin would put the claw on that fucker, and Kevin did indeed claw that fucker. So I really appreciate them giving us that moment. But yeah, it was a good start to the night. After that, we had another 0 hour multi person tag match. Uh, let's see, who all was it? It was the Don Callis family, so it was Lance Archer, Rocky Romero, uh, Trent Beretta, and who the fuck was the fourth? I'm drawing up. Was it Hechicero? Yeah, it was Hechicero. Um, I enjoy Hechicero. I don't know how I forgot. It's just so weird that he is now, part of the Don Callis family. The Don Callis family is just a huge stable at this point. I made this comment in the Discord that I'm worried that they're going to end up getting too many people, and it becomes unwieldy and it doesn't really matter because right now they've got like over 10 people, and they make up a good bulk of at least Collision, and probably part of Dynamite. And like half of those guys matter, in the grand scheme of things. The other half are there to help make up numbers, and because they're under contract, and it's good that they get something nice to do. It is a big stable, both in terms of quantity of people and their impact on the show. But yeah, like just Hechicero's there now. He's cool. Salute to him. With that being said, they took on the team of the conglomeration, the recently reformed conglomeration. So that's Tomohiro Ishii, uh, Kyle O'Reilly, Hologram, and Big Boom AJ making his return. He, I am struggling to remember. I believe it was Revolution where he was on the pre-show. It might have been Full Gear. I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but I remember, he had his QT Marshall prerequisite pre-show match, and now he's back again. I will say, the all the fucking memes aside, I do, the whole Costco guy thing is a bit like it's a bit questionable in my opinion in terms of like the things that a motherfucker does online, but being that he has a wrestling background and that he has like he showed once again in this match he is a good investment for them to bring in, from social media presence to capability of, he's not the greatest wrestler but he's a good hand. He promotes the hell out of, in a good way of what he's doing with AEW. It's not just a side mission that he does, which I don't know if, I don't know how much promotion WWE has gotten from some of their celebrity cameos. Floyd Mayweather did like some cool shit, that back then. But like, I don't know. Right now they have Jelly Roll on there, and I don't know, and this is not me saying he's not, but I genuinely don't know if Jelly Roll is, talking about these things in interviews, showing people where they're going to be, where to buy the tickets, all that. I think that that's a very important and lost art, is just accurate promotion with a good amount of information. But yeah, it was an 8-man tag match, and they went out there and they continued to heat the crowd up. Honestly, I give a flying fuck about Rocky Romero, and have said as much. From my understanding, he does a lot of great things behind the scenes at AEW, which is really, that's a great thing. I'm very happy. But it's in the same way as Colt Cabana. I never really cared about Colt Cabana as a wrestler, but I appreciate his contributions. But Rocky Romero has been on my screen so much as of late, and I understand people have to be able to beat somebody. But damn, man, like I am one of the few people who actually believes that Trent Beretta is worth anything. I like Trent Beretta pretty decent bit. I like Lance Archer. I feel like people don't really care that much about Lance Archer, but I think that he's cool. I liked most of the people in this match. Rocky Romero was also there. But with that being said, they went out there, and you had a period of time where Rocky Romero squares up with Big Justice, and you notice that this like 12, 13-year old kid, however old he is, I don't know, is actually taller than this grown ass man. And I was like, damn, that's got to be a terrible feeling. And then Trent just mushes AJ's kid to the fucking floor, and I was like, "Oh, that is," I was watching that, and it looked like he socked him in his shit. Like, live a little bit, back, I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be some shit." But they played the psychology of this match very well all the way through, which is something I really didn't expect. Like I say, for all the shit you can talk about the Costco guys and the whole like that being a thing, he did good psychology in this match. AJ, kept leading up to his big move and not hitting it. He wanted, like, they told, they did the little sympathetic baby face thing with his kid. The Rizzler was also there in a small cowboy hat and got like one of the bigger reactions. So shout out to Cowboy Rizzler. Um, so with that being said, they went through. They had a good match. Hologram and Hechicero did some really good stuff together. I said that they should probably, that should be the person that Hologram now fights and beats 17 times instead of the Beast Mortos. So that'll be. I hope maybe that'll come to fruition. With that being said, the face team gets the victory. The Don Callis family lost. Big Justice, while the ref is distracted, hits a big spear on a motherfucker, and it ends up with the power boom, and they get the win. It was another feel good moment. Finally, to round out the 0 hour, you had FTR versus the Outrunners. This is part two of a match that happened on the 100th episode of Collision, and a story that they've been telling for a good little while. The Outrunners, and first off, the Outrunners are one of my favorite tag team acts in AEW. It's just a thoroughly enjoyable and unique act. They have good charisma. They, are interesting with the way that they wrestle. They can wrestle. They just don't often get the chance to. And they're finally not being seen as just comedy guys anymore. At least I hope. We'll get into that in a little bit. But FTR has, ever since their heel turn, had another career resurgence. Some people attribute that to Stokely Hathaway. I think he does. He does all right. He does what he's supposed to do, and he's entertaining. He hasn't just cut that one promo for me yet since being with them, but it's working out, and that's all that matters. So, like I say, this was FTR and the Outrunners had a friendship, spanning last year and whatever, however long it lasted. It was some fun stuff when it was happening, but everybody watching knew that, like, okay, one day FTR is going to turn on these guys, and it is going to hit like a truck. And their eventual heel turn did not come at the expense of the Outrunners, but it 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 lends itself good enough chemistry and lore to be something interesting. Ah. So the Outrunners came out dressed as fucking Newports. So that was a pretty interesting choice. I think that was kind of clean as fuck, honestly. Um, And they went out there, and so, like I say, this I missed part of this match too at the start because we went to go get drinks and whatnot. I was already beginning to lose my voice from the amount of yelling I did in the first two matches. I did not pace myself well, this being the first live event that I've been to of wrestling since being a grown man. So we missed like the entrances in the beginning of the match. Everything that I did see was a very enjoyable, well wrestled match. I kind of knew what was going to happen here. We do predictions in the wrestling Discord that I'm in. It was I did go back to look and see what my predictions were, but I think it's probably the worst I've done on predictions in a good while. Honestly, I think that I had like there was sometimes that I was a bit more cynical than what they planned, and sometimes I was a bit more hopeful than what they had planned. But I definitely knew that the Outrunners weren't gonna like. I had hope, but I knew they weren't gonna let them win here, despite them losing just a couple weeks ago. It was something to get them and FTR on the big show of the year, because they couldn't find another reason to run some variant of FTR and Young Bucks at All In this year, so that tradition's finally broken. But yeah, so FTR gets their victory with some, once again, Stokely Hathaway shit cannery. And like I say, I understand that it's heel work. I know how that shit works. But running roughly the same finish, like a couple weeks apart from each other, some people don't watch Collision, so, maybe they didn't get to see it. In my opinion, also, the Collision match was better than this one. I didn't get to see the full thing, but from what I saw, it was a bloody affair on Collision, and th- they've they got the victories, but FTR has been making the Outrunners look like $1 million. And all I can hope for is that them losing twice back to back to these guys isn't just, all right, now their story's done and they disappear off TV for a while. They've had momentum for the longest time. They were like top merch sellers. The fans were behind them. They got their tag title shot, but it was just kind of, it felt too little too late and like a consolation prize almost. So I'm really hoping that they get a sustained push in a tag division that could use more stories and more shit to do, honestly. Um, as far as FTR goes, they're building some shit very clearly here. Um, that we'll get into this later tonight. 1 second. Uh, so yeah, we move on from that. That is the entirety of 0 Hour. It was a good set of matches that got people ready for what was to come shortly. We begin the night proper with the trios titles being defended. Samoa Joe, Powerhouse Hobbs, and Katsuyori Shibata, aka the Ops, defended their titles against a variant of the Death Riders, Claudio Castagnoli, Wheeler Yuta, and Gabe Kidd. Fun fact: I was in the section I was seated in. There were just sporadic chants through the, well, maybe not chants, but heckles through the match. Just randomly, a motherfucker would just "fuck you, Gabe Kidd," and I think that was pretty funny because genuinely, I don't give a fuck about Gabe Kidd. I said that Claudio Castagnoli is cool, and his two partners here are fucking wieners, dog. Like these guys are absolute just bitch assness. And I don't mean this in a heel sense of, oh, I want to see them get their comeuppance. I mean that one of them went out, is coasting off of a Kenny Omega match and has not done anything substantial since that, in any time of me seeing him. He hasn't cut a great promo. He hasn't had a great match. He hasn't done anything substantial. But like it's as if his character is what if old like 2020 era, John Moxley was just not that good of a wrestler, which some people believe that he's not, but that motherfucker has some great, classics under his belt. Gabe Kidd just goes out there and presents himself as like the baddest motherfucker on the planet, and then just loses a bunch, or just like, aha, I have a briefcase, and then he just like hits a motherfucker with it. Like, he doesn't do no clean shit, bro. He just be out there just getting his ass whooped and just being a stooge for folks, and that's not great to me. The other one is fucking Wheeler Yuta, who has fully devolved into a shaggy dog. And I've said he was a dork. I used to like Wheeler Yuta like a good bit, man. I was hoping that he was going to have this huge breakout thing as a part of the BCC, and I think they had the chance to do that. And instead, they just did bullshit. Like, I watched a motherfucker suffocate a man to death with a plastic bag, and Wheeler was crying and all this. Oh, the next month or whatever, he's lost. He's like, hey, I don't want to be a part of this shit. Great storytelling. And then just at the pay-per-view, for no real reason at all, he decides, he's like, all right, I'm going to help run back this same suffocation to death of this man with a plastic bag. You know, uh, that shit is just it's fucking stupid. And ever since then, he is the person who all the bad shit happens to. He is in every way but physical Rocky Romero. Um, he got his ass whipped, a good portion of this match, and I don't hold that against him. That's what he was there for. But he just generally gets his ass whipped and then gets chumped out by his own, teammates, and doesn't ever have any internal conflict of, damn, maybe I shouldn't be here. He just takes it like a bitch. So that kind of sucks. But anyway, this iteration of the Ops is fucking fantastic. Powerhouse Hobbs definitely feels like he belongs in the Ops, and they go out there and consistently do a bunch of excellent shit. The trios titles have not seen much of anything happen with them recently. I am not in the camp of the people who don't watch Collision and don't know that, like, there have been a couple of title defenses, albeit squashes and whatever the case may be. But they need to do more with these belts. They're on some great talent now. Even for all their faults, Claudio, Pac, and fucking, hold on, what? I don't know. Claudio and Pac are great talents. Yuta, can do some good stuff. They should have been doing stuff with the trios titles. The last like three champs have just not done shit. So I'm hoping that that'll change soon. But as somebody pointed out, they might just, like, Tony Khan might just hate these fucking belts now, and that sucks. But oh well. We got a good match. The Ops dominated most of it, as it should be, and they got the victory. And then afterwards, the Death Riders, jumped to them from behind and put Joe's neck in a chair and then just smoked his shit. So, from what I've seen online, Joe will be taking some time off to go film something. I can't remember what it is. I don't think it's not Twisted Metal. It's some other shit, I think. But he'll be gone for a period of time, which makes me wonder why. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I did not want that iteration of the Death Riders to have the trios titles, especially not back. But I question them having a motherfucker win and then immediately like go out for a while. So that kind of sucks. People theorize that maybe Hook will come be a part of it, but that's just weird anyway, because like Hook already seemed mad that Joe replaced him. I don't know. Anyway, so that's how that went. What the fuck was next? It Trying to recall this is kind of a bitch for me. I believe next was the men's casino gauntlet. A whole lot of motherfuckers in the AEW signature match. I'm not gonna name all of them. There are podcasts that have done that. Ones that I watch. So shout out to those two nerds. Uh, Importantly, MJF, Mystico, Mark Briscoe. You had Anthony Bowens, Brody King, Bandito, Konosuke Takeshita. A good few people here. You got to see the return of Juice Robinson, who came back in just the absolute worst look that he's ever had. That fucker shaved off his entire beard so he doesn't look like Juice Robinson anymore. And then he was just wearing a fucking onesie and shit. So I just was not rocking with that. But it was good to see him back. Ricochet was also in there, which leads into, Ricochet was doing great work, great heel work. He really reinvented his character. He's been doing amazing since coming to AEW. And as of recent, like the last month or so, Tony Khan just decided he doesn't give a fuck about Ricochet anymore. And I think that's ass because, he just decided to, like, hey, Ricochet's like, hey, I need a team. I need, some people who will, come fuck with me. And I'm like, okay, this could be cool. You got Action in, Dreddy, and Leo Rush. Maybe they could be, good ones. Oh, it's Blake Christian and Lee Johnson. Maybe that's something. No, let's just give them the same henchman that couldn't get over being a part of Swerve's stable. So Ricochet is now just anchored down and weighed down by the gates of agony. So that kind of sucks. But I bring this up because, in this period of time, they came in and started helping to, clear house and whatnot, but were stopped from taking out Juice Robinson by the Guns. Great reaction for the Guns coming back. And so I really enjoyed that a lot. There were some interesting story things that come out of this match. MJF wins the whole thing, spoiler alert. He should have won. It's about time he gets a chance back at the world title picture. And it becomes more interesting with the results of the main event that we'll talk about later. But there's interesting story beats that come out of this. Anthony Bowens, he once again came up short. There have been backstage segments where he is, visibly frustrated. And, Max Caster was the last person in, came out there and got good reactions for his little goofy gimmick thing. But he is, currently pissed at Billy Gunn, at Max Caster and whatnot. He feels as though he's being looked at as a joke. It's all seemingly leading to a heel turn for Bowens. And it's looking like a huge, double turn because Caster's getting some good reactions and he might be the face soon. So if that's the case, whether that was an audible or that was the long term plan, I think it'll serve both guys well given what we've seen now. And I think that that's something that can benefit both of their characters. It really could be a generational story if they do it the right way. We'll see how it goes. Beyond that, Bandito Takeshita got to continue there. Supposedly they had a great match this weekend. I didn't get to see it. It's probably the first time I haven't watched Super Card of Honor in 3-4 years. But yeah, they did a lot of good things in this match. It gives you the chance to tell a lot of stories and do a lot of things for a lot of people. And so that's what happened there. I think, like I said, I think the right guy won, and I think that is what's important moving forward. Let's see. After that match, what the fuck was next? Hold on. Let me go look at the. I have pictures of everything. I took a lot of pictures at the event. Let's see here. I didn't, and I thought this was next, but I figured there was no way it was this early in the night. All right. So next up, we have the tag team match between the Young Bucks and Will Ospreay and Swerve Strickland. For the second year in a row, Tony Khan decided to appeal to my good friend, the Robot, and only him specifically, by having Will Ospreay have an Assassin's Creed themed All In entrance. They had some really cool samurai stuff going on. They had another video package, which I'm going to like. I'm going back to watch the show. I began it last night, but to see and hear all of this shit with the accompanying video package, and I think that like it was crazy. It looked great. The pyro, the all of that shit, it really sold that this motherfucker is like a top guy, is like one of their biggest stars and whatnot, and they present him as such. And I think that is very important in this type of shit. Swerve Strickland got a, one of the live singing intros and whatnot, and that was really cool. He got a whole bunch of pyro and a whole bunch of, great shit. These motherfuckers look like $1 million, honestly, and that was very important both to the story and to the characters themselves. The Young Bucks come out and have, their traditional cheesy, dweeby, corny entrance, and it was amazing. They got up on a boat lift type thing, and were waving the flag while Justin Roberts gave their pre-written preamble, and so that was, it was great. The actual match itself was fantastic by all accounts. For some people, like some people critique, and I make this critique sometimes, of how often modern wrestling does, like so many false finishes, so many kickouts and whatnot. And maybe that is a fair critique here. It depends on how you feel. The discourse on Twitter is never genuine. It's just a bunch of idiots critiquing things that they don't like about wrestling, which is fine. You can have your preference of things, but just because you don't like something doesn't make it inherently wrong. And that goes for anything, any style of wrestling, any company, whatever. Like I don't think that there's much of a wrong way to do professional wrestling, honestly. Um, it's about what makes you feel something, whether it be emotional storytelling, whether it be great displays of athleticism, whether it be, great character work and like presentation and whatnot. Anything that makes you feel something is the most important part of consuming any form of media. So, like I say, they went out there and these guys just did a fucking phenomenal job. A whole lot of athleticism, some like good storytelling beats. The story leading up to this was stupid, honestly. Like I get why it like led up to it, but it got to the point to where I had said multiple times that I don't want either of these guys to win. If the Bucks won, then Swerve and Will could not challenge for the world title for a year. If Swerve and Will won, then they would become the EVPs now instead of the Young Bucks. Neither of these are things that I wanted. Neither of these are things that you should really want because, they even went so far as to say it on TV. Who is going to trust Will Ospreay as the EVP? And maybe they'll do some storytelling shit with that. I don't know. But these guys, like, it's more so that they want the power that, so that the evil people can't have it anymore, rather than them wanting it to utilize it in any manner. So that's my problem with that. I obviously don't want them to be out of the world title picture for a year, because that's two of your biggest stars. Like I don't think that Swerve should be involved in the world title picture for a little while. He just had a shot at Dynasty, but I digress. The point being is that I didn't like the things that they tacked on to the build here, but it was never going to be a bad match. These are four of the best in the world today. Genuinely going out there and just leaving it all in the ring. Um, Swerve and Will end up picking up the victory, and it was a hell of a match. It took a lot in order for it to make it happen. Towards as I can tell you from being in the building, everybody was on their feet for, probably the back half of this match, honestly. It just kept escalating and kicking into a higher gear and people not knowing what's going to happen. Me personally, I end up with some form of, negative feelings sometimes when I'm like watching these matches unfold like this, where I'm like, okay, after a certain thing, it's like, okay, what more can a motherfucker do? Like, all right, now it's like, all right, I know that you're not going to let this person win this match now. So that was kind of how I got to feeling, but they actually did. They actually won the match, and good for them, honestly. I think it was the better of the two calls. We'll see how it, works out moving forward. Another thing that we will, address later, happened. Wait a minute. Now that I think about it, I did skip a match. I knew it because, okay, so I knew I was off track. because this didn't happen that early in the night. My apologies. You know, chronological shit is a bit vague sometimes. But yeah, so that's that match covered. Before this, there was the match where we had decided that we were going to, you know, go to the restroom and whatnot. Uh, they decided to do a four-way for the TNT title, the recently vacated TNT title, between Daniel Garcia, the previous champion, Dustin Rhodes, Sammy Guevara, who both had already competed earlier in the night, and Kyle Fletcher. My money was always on Kyle Fletcher, even when it was the original matchup, because I felt like he was having the rocket strapped to his back. This is, you know, his time to shine. This is not what happened. They went out there, and from what I saw, it was a good match. You know, I missed part of the match. Supposedly, it wasn't, you know, like it wasn't the greatest. Uh, they say it's the worst match of the night, at least is what I've heard people say. Which I mean, maybe, you know, I don't know. But I do know that, like, I came back. You know, my energy was starting to dip at this point, and so I, you know, like I, it was a long event, man. This shit was an 8 hour event altogether. It was like the longest event from what I've heard of like any wrestling event. It's it's insane. But yeah, so I wasn't really that hyped through the match, but I'll tell you the finish of the match, I jumped up and, you know, was incredibly hype. I was cheering like a motherfucker. I think that it is really dope that they decided to pull the trigger to give Dustin something nice in AEW before he leaves. I think that you know, Kyle still deserves some shit. You know, it would be a good call for him, and I assume he will win the belt. But this is what I was talking about earlier, where I feel partially that maybe, you know, this shit was done as a result. I won't say punishment, but it's like, all right, your push is paused right now because, like, you know, you're just not being safe with the workers, man. And, you know, this might just be my own bullshit conjecture. I don't know. They might just have him fucking eat Dustin alive, you know, on the next collision because of this shit. They might have just did it to have a feel good moment, which was, you know, from my understanding, sorely needed after what happened with Adam Cole. Whatever the case may be, Dustin Rhodes is your TNT champion. Had a great emotional, you know, tears in his eyes. It was a great moment for Texas because he is from there, you see. So, with that being said, I believe next was the women's gauntlet match. Yeah, after like I say, the before the women's gauntlet match was the last pause that we took to go, you know, get food, get anything. So I was like, okay, I know what this is going to be. It'll take a while. I'm okay with missing part of this. They did a great job, honestly. The all the women involved. You know, you had Chris Statlander, Megan Bain, Thunder Rosa, Athena, you know, Mina Shirakawa. Suri made her debut. So did Alex Windsor. It was a good match for all intents and purposes of anything that they needed. They were able to, and that's one thing that's good about this kind of match is that you can tell a bunch of stories, you can give a bunch of good in-ring action, you can do debuts, you can do returns, and people can feel like a big deal without winning, you know, the match and it not hurting them that much. So this, like I say, this match was shorter than the men's gauntlet. I believe it had fewer entrants also. You know, that's probably just partially by the nature of the AEW women's division, but that is what it is. But it was a good match, all things considered. You know, all the women got to go out there and, you know, do some good shit, get their shit in. It was eventually won by Athena, you know, also Texas native. I'm starting to notice a trend here. Athena is fantastic. Athena has held the Ring of Honor women's title for like 3 or 4 years now. Whatever the case it is, she like beat Samoa Joe's record. I think it's like around 4 years now. She has done some amazing work on a show that people are not getting to see enough, but she is bringing the relevance to it. She is doing her part. You know, I remember back whenever she debuted on AEW, you know, she went out there, had her title program with Jade Cargill. And I remember people like that was just not a good match. and people really like lost faith in her. I feel like for a while after that, and she has just made everyone who doubted her eat shit in that regards, and I think that that's amazing. I felt like her winning this match made me know exactly who was going to win the women's title match, but that is what it is. I think that she is a great winner to be picked. I think that it leads to a good story. I am kind of just sick of people who already have belts going after the world title belt, but maybe something will happen between now and then. Who knows? Um, but yeah, good match for all the women. The AEW women's division, I've made this point recently. It feels strangely, good for me lately. It's not, all the top stars that you would expect and whatnot, but you have Tony Storm, you have Mercedes Monet. Beyond that, you have Chris Statlander, Willow Nightingale, Megan Bain, Penelope Ford, Sky Blue, Julia Hart, Tekla, Queen Aminata, Alex Windsor, Suri, Athena now, Thunder Rosa. There's just a bunch of people who like it. Ty Mello, Anna Jay. It feels very full at the moment, and it feels like it's full of people who have something to do. They're not just showing up to lose and immediately disappear. Serena Deeb still exists wherever she's at. Britt Baker is still there, although who knows for how long. There's just a bunch of names in there that might end up being something special or involved in some. It feels like there's a bunch of new faces they're bringing in that will all get some form of a push and some TV time, and that's really good for a women's division that has struggled in the last year or two, uh, outside of its top talents. But with that being said, we move on to the triple threat tag team match, aka the "Why the fuck is Christian Cage here" match. They built an entire story for like 2 months between Kevin Knight and Speedball Mike Bailey, aka Jet Speed, and the Hurt Syndicate, Bobby Lashley, Shelton Benjamin, who have held the titles for a good period of time now. Uh, and then towards the end, backstage politician himself, Christian Cage. I love Christian, by the way, but I am going to just fully take the piss out of this because there's no reason that him and Nick Wayne should have been there. They literally, like, Kevin Knight challenged Shelton Benjamin to a one-on-one match, and Shelton accepted. And then during the week, the graphic pops up, and it's like, hey, Nick Wayne's also here. Like, why the fuck is Nick Wayne here? But they went through and plans originally for All In are different than the All In that we got. I believe we'll address that here in a couple minutes, but it was a solid match. Honestly, I wasn't hugely into. I think it was a good match. But my energy wasn't hugely there. Like I say, it had just been such a long show. I was waiting for the matches that I had come there to see, and it just it took a while, man. But there was some great shit in there. Speedball Mike Bailey is phenomenal. The Hurt Syndicate are phenomenal. Kevin Knight is good. I'm just not fully sold on him. He feels like right now he's interesting because he is attached to Mike Bailey for me. I feel like I'll watch what he does next, but he hasn't just captured my interest yet. Uh, so the end of this match sees there was tension between FTR, who was on commentary for this match, so you knew some bullshit was going to happen. And I mean, everybody, honestly, the Hurt Syndicate and all that. FTR got bitched out by, I believe it was Bobby. Bobby bitched out Dax and also to that degree Cash. And then they got up there and they were like, hey, all right, I'm going to fuck some shit up. And then Christian got pushed into them. They got knocked off the apron. Hurt Syndicate retains. And FTR now have beef for Christian because they can't use their eyeballs and see that somebody had pushed him into them. So I guess that's a thing. But they went through and This is the point where you see Nick Wayne turn on Christian, which is it's stupid, honestly. It needed to happen. Like they this needed to happen at some point, but there was no provocation for this. The lead up here, there wasn't, there was tension like a month and a half ago, and then everything was good for like the last month. And Nick fell in line and was like a good little lapdog. And now Shayna Wayne's in on it, and Kip Sabian. Oh, all of a sudden, everybody wants to deal with this. This is ridiculous. Honestly, out of everybody, Kip Sabian, he is the epitome of that meme of Blood thinks he's part of the team. Like he's just there for some shit. He's been a stupid addition ever since he first joined the fucking thing. But anyway, once again, Concerto lore is all Christian and Adam Copeland's careers are about. And so Cope's music hits, and I jumped out of my seat once again and was, grown man yelling at the top of his lungs in hype about this shit. Cope is back. He came back, saved Christian. People were like online complaining about like that they feel like it's the same thing where like Jeff Hardy came out and he was like doing his dance on the way to the ring, despite his brother being beat up. This wasn't that. Christian stopped being in danger the moment that music hit because one thing people are taking into account is Nick Wayne and Kip Sabian are fucking idiots, right? Like they're gonna stand there and just look shocked, like they are just they're not going to pull that trigger at that point. Christian is in no danger. He could have got up and walked out of that ring, honestly. Uh, but Cope goes, clears the ring. He still has the spiked board spike with him. Grabs the mic, tells Christian to go find himself, this time instead of telling him to go fuck himself. Great callback to their feud. And, as like the lights dimmed and whatnot, Christian, I got to see, he stands up, he grabs they have the video package for the next match playing. But Christian, grabs the spike and he looks real confused, he's conflicted, he leaves. This is good shit. You wanted this, it's not there yet, but the moment that they genuinely do embrace once more, it's going to be fantastic. A lot of discourse lately about Adam Copeland as well. People are idiots online, honestly. He did not have a good story with John Moxley. He was always going to have a world title story. It was going to happen at some point. They did it. They got it out the way. It wasn't good. But the rest of what he's done has not been bad since he got to AEW. He had probably the feud of the year. I don't remember what other feuds happened that year, but he like I and I don't mean that there weren't memorable ones. I mean I'd have to go back and look. But he had probably my favorite feud of that year with Christian. Leading into some great matches between the two of them and an open challenge that he was able to use while having the title and leading up to the title to get people some TV time that didn't normally get it. He had a story with the House of Black that led to a great match with Malachi where he did some stupid shit. And then he had, this stinker of a story leading up to this. And now he's doing this. The man has not done, bad work. He's had a bad moment. But I defy you to tell me someone who hasn't had a bad moment in their AEW career or in their WWE career for that matter. I just don't think that's a fair critique. The guy's like 50 something. These were things that were going to happen anyway. He's doing his little retirement tour. Let him have his fun. So yeah, the next match is the AEW Women's Title match. Timeless Tony Storm versus Mercedes Moné. Um, this was an interesting build-up. I, like I said, this was one of the predictions that I went into the night where I was just so sure that they were just going to give Mercedes another belt for the fuck of it. I, once again, am not a fan of people who already have belts coming to get another belt. Like at least a world title belt there. Like it's like, okay, because now you have to defend multiple of these on the same show. And that's kind of ass to me. But that is what it is, however it boils down. Uh, The entrances for this one were phenomenal. Mercedes had a great entrance. We were a bit far back from the actual ramp, so I couldn't see. But apparently, all the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders were out there doing the dance and shit. And apparently, they were all wearing a different belt that Mercedes has because she is the belt collector. That's phenomenal. I didn't get to see. Apparently, she pulled up in a lowrider, in tribute to Eddie Guerrero. That's fantastic. But I did get to see the long fucking cloak she had with all of her victims' names on it, and that is just fantastic, honestly. Um, Shout out to Mercedes. She's been eating her oats lately. The yams are yamming, if you will. Uh, so salute to her. Tony Storm's entrance. Tony Storm is just such a. She might be the best character work that it's either her or Hangman, honestly. Like in terms of a character evolution and having like arcs and consistently staying entertaining, because her video package and whatnot here is and her entrance is symbolic of her, you know, her time having come. She is an old beaten woman, and she's refusing to go down without a fight. So it was fantastic. It was the pomp, the circumstance, the grandeur. There was so much here. It felt like the biggest women's story that they've done. And it is, honestly, it's a story that these two women wish that they got to do in WWE. Maybe not this story, but a story of this caliber, let me say. So these two, they went out there and they tore the house down, honestly. They had a good length match and a good quality match. I won't spend too long talking about, all the things that happened in the match itself, but, you know, this was also one of those things where I felt like the false finishes, kind of hurt the match because they were throwing everything but the kitchen sink to each other. You can say you're making somebody look tough, but I was like, okay, you hit a motherfucker with three of your finishers and still can't pin them. I was like, this is ridiculous. And that's at the point where once again I start feeling like, okay, you're just not going to let this person win the fucking like the match, and that's fine. But like once I start, like it dampers my enjoyment. But I enjoyed it fully through. I don't mean to sound like that, but a big reaction. uh you know my lady's favorite character, Timeless Tony Storm, retains her belt. Mercedes Moné loses her first match in AEW, and now we see where these people go from here. Tony has Athena looming on the horizon. Meanwhile, Mercedes goes on to do whatever. Honestly, there's a good mid card scene in the AEW women's division, honestly. And so afterwards, I think we had the once in a lifetime. That's stupid. But in AEW, probably it'll be the only time they face each other. Kenny Omega versus Kazuchika Okada for the Unified Championship. Some people think it's a stupid name. Maybe it is. I like the look of the belt. It's got a lot of, build up to it. This is a match that is several fucking years in the making, and so it's very important that you know that this is not the Kenny Omega and Kazuchika Okada of 7 years ago. These guys, they are fantastic. Some of the best professional wrestlers in the world. They've had in their respective title reigns some amazing, high quality match of the year contender matches. But this wasn't, going to be one of the best wrestling matches of all time. And it was good. It was, I'd argue it was really good. But in my opinion, this was a match that didn't get to that third gear. Right when they got to that gear, the match was over, honestly. The entrances were amazing. Okada got some big pop. Once again, in the same way that Will and Swerve got all the things that made them feel like the biggest stars. Kenny and Okada got those as well. Kenny more so than Okada because, Okada is a big deal because Don Callis is there. That fucking bald fraud. But, you know, Kenny Omega got a fantastic entrance, really cool gear. I mean, I am still the I prefer the One Winged Angel theme song, but this rendition, that makes him feel like a Japanese video game final boss or RPG final boss. I'm okay with that, honestly. They lit a giant Omega symbol on fire. They had the best live entrance, live music entrance of the night. And so they did a good job of this, honestly. And so they went through, they did the whole match. Okada wins the match, partially as a result of Don Callis shenanigans, because it's physically impossible for Tony Khan and AEW to book a Kenny Omega feud without Don Callis, clearly, despite the fact that he was betrayed by the man 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, and that since then there have been at least 3 to 4 feuds that Kenny Omega has been in involving Don Callis, several of which he has won. And it's just like I say, the guy's got a stable of 10 fucking people, bro. That was some dumb shit leading up to here. They put Okada in the fucking Don Callis family just because, man, because he's fighting Kenny Omega, and it's fucking stupid. Now the reformed elite, looks weird because it's like, all right, Jack Perry's gone. Okada is in the Don Callis family. Is it just the Bucks? Like, I don't know what the fuck, that's just some real dumb shit in my opinion. But it's just like, come on, man. Let him focus on managing Brian Cage, and fucking Lance Archer and, whoever else. Why do we have Okada here? All it does is make it seem like he went out and got, and it has, whether unintentionally or not, in like a couple of promos, it makes it seem like he went out and got a new toy that is now more important than Kyle Fletcher, Konosuke Takeshita, or any of these people. And it's crazy, man. I'll watch and I'll see what they're leading to here, but I didn't like that part. Either way, Okada wins the belt due to shenanigans, and then Tony Khan announces during the press conference that because Okada won, it's all going to be under Continental rules, and he will never be able to shenan again. Which is a 1,000 IQ move. You win the fucking belt by somebody interfering, and then you immediately change the rules to where nobody can interfere to take the belt from you. That's kind of wicked. But yeah, it was a good match. I enjoyed it. I was wearing a Kenny Omega shirt that was bought for me at the event. So I was a bit upset, but I had a decent feeling they weren't going to let Kenny win. Kenny is, I found out Kenny is actually like older than I thought that he was, honestly. So Kenny Omega is he's nearing the end of his career. He's given a lot of time to the business. He's given some fantastic things. It sucks. It makes me sad, but he's gotten there. That's all that matters. He almost died, and it's a miracle that he's still able to wrestle afterwards, and especially wrestle at such a high level as he does. So it's one of those things, you can't cry because it's over. You gotta smile because it happened. Speaking of which, the main event, almost a year-long story building up. Well, I mean, on one side at least. Hangman Adam Page versus Jon Moxley in a Texas death match for the AEW World Heavyweight Championship. This match is the culmination of a lot of fucking things. Before we start talking about this, I will say, myself and my fiance, we ended up at a place to eat before the event. We went to this place, I won't say the name, but we went out, in case people want to go back there and whatnot and maintain their anonymity. But we went there. We were eating brunch before the event, and uh, you know, we sat down at a table and she says, "Hey, look, those people are wearing wrestling shirts." I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And it was, Hangman Adam Page shirts. And so one of the guys, I guess he went to the bathroom, he came back, I told him, I said, "That's a nice shirt, sir." He was like, "Thank you." He said, "Where is family?" So we sat there and ate brunch, talking to the family of Hangman Adam Page who had showed up. The world is such a small place, man. It's so crazy. His uncle, his sister, his dad, whatever the case may be, like all of them were there. And I just think that that was a really dope experience that, who would have expected, honestly. Got to inform them, some things that they may not know and whatnot, about the attendance and, all of this stuff. And it was a good experience. So I say this to say this this was a highly debated match online as to which way it should go, which way it was going to go, you know, what was going to happen. People felt as though there was no way that Hangman should lose this match. I was of the opinion that it was very possible that Hangman loses this match. I completely understand, why he shouldn't and why he should. But I was going to let it all play out in the ring. Um, this this was as brutal as you would expect it to be. In my opinion, it was not as brutal as the Swerve and Hangman Texas Death Match, but I can understand if anybody says that it was. They pulled out a lot of the stops there. I watched the motherfucker get stabbed in his bald ass head with a fork. You know what I'm saying, and spurt blood everywhere. I watched people get drugged through broken beer bottle glass on the mat. Barbed wire tables, people going through, beds of spikes, nail beds people are getting slammed onto and shit. It was an absolute human car wreck, demolition derby. And that's exactly what it was always going to be. But it was the crescendo on not only a night, but a long term arc for AEW itself. You see the title that I have here. This was, in a lot of people's eyes, a make or break moment for AEW. AEW has suffered a lot of bad publicity that put it in a bit of a slump for a while. It was never as bad as people like to make it out to be, but it was, pretty lower quality than what people were used to, whether it be not, it was never from the matches. It was from, the stories that people were telling, the characters that they were seeing. People were not very high on AEW. This was during the time when WWE was its hottest. Part of that is probably contributed to all of the shit that happened with CM Punk. Whether however you feel about that is how you feel about it. I'm not going to change your opinion. I do think that it is strange to let a single person color the opinion of any product, regardless. Um, this what nature is healing, and it has been healing here. That was what this night was about, and we were going to see what the end result was. They went out there, they had a fucking insane violent fest. And so towards the end of the match, it was always going to be the same way. Things start breaking down, all the Death Riders show up, and it is just the Avengers Endgame moment where it's like, okay, everything is bad, who can help save the hero? And different people came out there to do so. Will Ospreay came out there and just got fucking clapped. He tried to help, and then they put his neck in a chair and just smoked his shit, and they hauled him off. Um, you had, there was a period of time where Mox was trying to get the victory. You see a video play, and Darby Allin cut a fucking promo on top of Mount Everest for a wrestling angle. That is absolutely bonkers, but you know that whatever that distraction was, Then you see a motherfucker slide in the ring in a Blue Panther mask. Bryan Danielson is back, and he just starts beating the shit out of everybody. You know what I'm saying? Especially Wheeler Yuta, who deserved it, honestly. Then Darby Allin repels from the ceiling, and he, ends up helping take out like the Death Riders. He evens it back up. Marina Shafir is still out there, and she goes to get the briefcase. All of a sudden, now, she is handcuffed by Swerve, who was waiting under the table. It was one of those moments where, all right, so let's break this down, and I won't be super long winded here, but this deserves a bit of a breakdown here. Two stories have been told here to end this match. John Moxley has had a reign of terror as, the dictator of the Death Riders and whatnot. He came in with a mission to attempt to change AEW because he didn't like the complacency and the way that people were, acting like a joke and attempting to get ahead in the business. Over this period of time, he made several enemies, Orange Cassidy, Jay White, Adam Copeland, etc. But through this continuous, it's one of those things, and I love this trope when you tell a long-term story and the eventual downfall is all the people that the villain stepped on, to get there. Eventually, your consequence, the consequences of your actions come back to bite you. What's going on, Slim Man? Um, the consequence of your action come back to bite you eventually, and I think that that's a very powerful trope, honestly. So Bryan Danielson, Darby Allin, Swerve Strickland, etc. All these people that Mox and the Death Riders stepped on to get to this position of power where they had everything in an iron grip has come back to cost them. But beyond that, this was the story of the redemption of Hangman Adam Page. Hangman has had an over 2-year arc, where he lost everything. He already was not he had been a world champion before, and he was lost since he lost the title. He felt as though he failed to defend AEW from somebody who he perceived as a negative influence or a danger to the company. And afterwards, he was just left adrift. He had, over the course of time, he, made up with his friends in the elite due to, once again, John Moxley and, at that time, the Blackpool Combat Club and whatnot. He had a lot of small victories, but it was never the mountaintop moment that he wanted. And he continued to chase this feeling and yet fight these feelings of self-doubt until the point to where Swerve Strickland came in his life. Let's see here. What is this? Oh yeah, I saw that Becky Lynch shit because motherfuckers were out there calling her Becky Hogan, and she was pissed about that shit. But yeah. So Adam Page can, he went into this feud with Swerve that originally only started for, card placement. That was the point. Was that Swerve wanted to be the world champion. He wanted to be the first black world champion, and he felt that Hangman was complacent. And through this story, Swerve ended up, getting ahead through these cheating means and whatnot, and he really just fucked up Hangman's life over the course of time because he's such a charismatic, and cool character. The fans start supporting Swerve in Hangman's absence. Hangman comes back, and this person who broke into his house and, did these horrible fucking things to him, now the fans love him despite the fact that he feels as though he's crazy because he's watching, like, he's like, hey, did y'all not see what this motherfucker did to me? How can y'all support him and still say that you support and love me? So he continued to go down this spiral of madness where vengeance was all that was on his mind. He burned a motherfucker's house down, and he brought a motherfucker into a steel cage, broke a chair over his head, stabbed him with a fucking needle, and all of these things to win. And all of this because he was hoping it would make him feel better, and it didn't. You know, uh, Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think Art was supposed to come, talk about this shit too, but, who knows? People have their plans and whatnot. But, so Hangman went with all of this shit. He cost everything from Swerve, the world title, the fucking, like his childhood house, you know, all of these things that he took from him, and it still did not make him feel better. He ended the career of Christopher Daniels. He beat the fuck out that guy so much where he can't wrestle anymore. He, unintentionally through pain and grief and whatnot. He was beating the shit out Jeff Jarrett. He was just out there lashing out in hopes that he would feel better about something that really was his own personal demons fighting him. And so this is the end of the redemption arc where he finally realizes that maybe he can move past all of this negative shit that's happened to him and realize that sometimes in life bad shit just happens to people. And if you become the monster due to the monstrosities that have happened to you, then you don't end up winning anything. You won't feel better. You won't end up, prospering and whatnot. You can get ahead, but at a certain point, will that erase the sorrow from your soul? And no, it will not. So he became the hero that was necessary through a redemption arc because he had to be. Everybody else had failed. Through the only way that they were ever going to defeat this invading and terrorizing force was going to be by people putting their, egos and past issues to the side and focusing on what is the most important, and that is the betterment of the company and you know one man being able to be at the top of the mountaintop without jealousy clouding it. um yeah, I know about that Art guy, man. I tried to tell y'all about him a long time ago, but it's all right, man. So, like I say, this was this was the feel good moment that everybody needed. Hangman wins, after all of the outside shit. This is, in the same way people felt about Cody and Roman. I feel that the Cody and Roman thing took too long, so it detracts a little bit for me from that. But this is the same level of feeling, in my opinion. But I think that it's told through a better long term story. And this isn't tribalism speaking, it's just my opinion. Like whichever one you want to like. But with that being said, I think that this was the moment to end the night on. It feels like a reset for AEW. It feels like they finally finished healing and rehabbing their image in the public eye. To the point, partially due to their own, focus on themselves and good quality output, partially due to the fact that their competition has been struggling with their public perception as of late. So what happens after this will be very important. But this is it's one of those things where, All In, WrestleMania, Wrestle Kingdom, etc. These are supposed to be the biggest shows of the year. Therefore, they're going to be the ends of the story for the year. This feels like a reset with all the matches that I mentioned. Now, there are things that can carry on to the next season, but it's the end of a season of a show. What they do next will be very important, but it feels as though things have finally healed, and now we see what the new era of AEW looks like, honestly. So overall, man, I think that it was a good show. There wasn't, I've seen plenty of pay-per-views that have at least one bad match. I didn't think there was a single bad match on the show. There was some great feel-good moments. There were some great wrestling matches. There was a lot of like, it genuinely felt like it was their biggest show of the year, both in terms of star power, performances, etc. They built up to something and they executed on it well, and I think that that's very important. If you haven't already seen it, go seek it out. And anybody that wants to come start watching the product and talk about some shit, we'd love to hear people's opinions, man. So with that being said, I've been on this bitch far too long anyway. As I said, y'all like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for showing up and showing some support. Now, here is to AEW in 2025.